Hi, I am Rafael Nodal from Tabacalera, USA, coming to you live here in Facebook and Facebook Live with my good friend, and we are very happy that he's able to join us today, Charlie Minato, co-founder of Half Wheel. Charlie, thank you for joining us today, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Rafael.
I appreciated you taking the time. I wasn't sure how busy you were going to be going out or all these things. How are you doing in this time of social distancing and stay at home? Where are you now?
Yeah, no, so I'm in our office here in Dallas. Brooks and I work out of here. Brooks is actually here today, but no one else. And so we're technically an essential business. I don't think that's what the government really intended on it, but they did say all news media are allowed to stay open. And even beyond that, because we don't have any employees here right now, we would still be allowed in the office. But it's not that different for us. Our business can be done almost entirely virtual. We don't have any physical products. The only thing we have to do is buy cigars and photograph them and smoke them. So the rest of it's all online. And Patrick agreed. One of our other colleagues lives in Phoenix, and so we're very used to a lot of these tools that people are finding out for the first time. The only difference has been I'm doing a lot more of these live chats. It seems like every week somebody has me on one of these things. So it's crazy. I don't know if anyone's watching them, but I'm doing a lot.
Well,
of them.
they are. Actually, I'm monitoring right now. We have our 50 people join us so far here at Cigar Live in Facebook Live. So, Charlie, thank you very much for joining us. Half Wheeled. Tell me a little bit. You're the co-founder. When did this idea for Half Wheel come in, and tell us a little bit about what prompted you to come up with that idea?
Yeah, so Half Wheel launched on January 1 of 2012. We started working on it in August of 2011. So Brooks Whittington and I both had cigar blogs of our own prior to that. Brooks lived in Dallas. My parents lived in Dallas at the time. I was going to school in North Carolina. And so Brooks and I got to know each other. We met up, and we obviously had a very common interest in cigars and also about writing about cigars. So his site was called Smoking Stogie. It focused on rare, hard-to-find cigars. And he's a professional photographer, so the photography was excellent, certainly much better than anything else that was out there. I had a website called the Cigar Feed, which did reviews, but was mainly known as a news site. Certainly not to the extent that Half Wheel is today, but we did a lot of reporting on new products, and we did the weekly news feature that we still do every Monday, although Patrick seemingly has taken over those reins these days. And we realized we were doing a lot of the same work. I was tracking down cigars to try to find out about information for a news story, and Brooks was trying to get a hold of them so he could be the first ones to review those cigars. So we started working on trying to create a better cigar blog. It was a much different time. You were around for it, but I think a lot of the people that read our site really don't remember what it was like. There was Cigar Insider, which is Cigar Aficionado's publication, was where most of the news was. But I don't know how many consumers honestly pay attention to Cigar Insider because you have to pay for it, and it's not. They advertise it a little bit, but unless you kind of know about Cigar Insider, I'm not sure you really ever accidentally find it. And then companies would send out press releases like Altadas in general and Drew Estate eventually, but not the small companies. And that was kind of it. And so if you wanted to just Google search to try to find out what new cigars came out in the last month, you were not going to find a lot. Your best bet was honestly probably going to a catalog like Cigars International or JR Cigar and just seeing whatever they were promoting that month. And even then, that really didn't encompass a lot of the smaller companies that were, coming up and becoming a lot larger because, this is 2010, 2011. So you have a lot of companies, like yours with Aging Room. You have companies like Taiwahe that were just in much, much different places, particularly if you compare where they were in 2008 to where they were by 2012.
Right.
Those 4 years was really saw a lot of companies sort of graduate to the next level. And so we launched Half Wheel and tried to make a better cigar blog.
So before Half Wheel, when you had your own blog and you did a cigar review and so did Brooke, question: what made you? What was the? Because obviously there's a component of not only the cigar that you love, but also the writing and the media and this aspect of journalism. What made you go into cigar? How was your first experience? How were you exposed to cigars?
Yeah, so I was exposed to cigars the first time I was in the Dominican Republic on a vacation with my family. My dad, who is not a big fan of the beach, was suggested that we go out and try to find some cigars. Obviously, sort of the tourist trap. He had heard there was a cigar factory nearby. We were in Punta Cana, so we were near La Romana, where your factory is. It's Tabacalería de Garcia. And we went off the resort, went to some little shop in Punta Cana where they were trying to sell us everything from Romeos and Monte Cristos from TDG to fake Davidoffs and fake Cubans. And they all knew a guy whose brother, was the factory manager or whatever. And so we bought a couple cigars and we went back to the resort. I won't say how old I was. I still have one of the fake Davidoffs, actually.
No kidding.
Yeah, he bought 4 of them, and we smoked one each, and I don't know what happened to his, but the second one that I had, I still have, actually. And the band's not bad. The cigar is not rolled properly. But I came back. I went to college, and I started smoking cigars. I was in North Carolina, not too far away from the JR Superstore. And I was fascinated by, there were all these Cuban brands that I'd heard of, like Romeo and Monte Cristo and Cohiba, which I think most people have heard of, even if you haven't ever smoked a cigar. But there were all these other brands that I'd never heard of before, like Oliva and Padron and Fuente. And we'd go to a tobacco store, not even a cigar shop, that had a little cabinet humidor, and you'd see all these other brands with different packaging, and couldn't pronounce most of them. So I went home and went to the internet and tried to learn. And some of them it was easier to learn about because some of them had websites that were functioning, which wasn't a thing in 2010 and 2009, I guess, at that point. But there wasn't a place for me to go where I could learn about what was happening in the industry. And what was so interesting to me was you had a company like Plasencia, who at the time wasn't really making cigars with their own name on them. They kind of were, but not really. But they were making cigars for everyone. And it was so weird to think that here's a company that grows tobacco, sells tobacco to people, makes cigars for other people who compete against each other. Like, why should anyone buy this Plasencia made cigar versus that Plasencia made cigar? Like, what could possibly be the difference? And so I started trying to learn. I got on the forums, and eventually I realized that I was really, or not really gifted, but I was certainly more gifted than most people were about paying attention to what was happening on Twitter and social media about new products. And decided that rather than just posting that information on forums, I would do it in my own website. And so that's how the Cigar Feed got started. It was the site that I wanted to see happen, and no one was really doing it.
Right. And so were you always inquisitive like that when you found something, let's say cars or any other subject in your life, that it makes you start looking and digging and really go beyond everything else? Or this was the first time?
No. That's always been the case. That's something I got from my father. He would find something that he was semi-interested in and then just research the crap out of it. He, some of that became helpful for his profession. But some of it was just, he was just passionate about kitchen knives and decided he was going to read as much as he could. And fortunately for me, unlike for my dad, I came up in a world in which the internet, I remember the days of dial-up internet, but I was more or less around when people had access to some capacity of internet, whereas, I wasn't having to subscribe to all these magazines and newsletters and go to the library and things like that. I certainly did my fair share of that when I was growing up, but, the internet you can do all of it at home, anywhere in the world.
So right now, what are you drinking and what are you smoking right now? I see a bottle. Is that a water or is that a soda?
Yeah, no, this is just Topo Chico. It's just mineral water. I haven't gone straight to the rum like you have. And then I'm smoking a cigar that, I think we'll see if it shows up on camera since it's the world's hardest cigar to photograph. But this is a cigar that it seemed like appropriate for this occasion. It was the Romeo by Aging Room before you were working for Tabacalería USA. It was a cigar that you collaborated with them on, I believe, their second collaboration.
Yes, actually, no. In our case, it was the first collaboration. Actually,
you were before Plasencia.
Yes. Well, no, you're right. This was no. With their second collaboration, Plasencia came first with the Espada, right?
Yeah.
Montegrito Espada. Yeah. In my case, it was the first collaboration. I fell in love with the Romeo brand, the red and white. First, the guy.
No, we could tell that you fell in love with the red and white since there's neither one of those colors on this band.
Well, with the cigar, with the red and white cigar. And then I had this, I felt in love. I was smoking a lot of that. I told my friends and partners, I'm going to go to Altadis. I'm going to tell them to make a cigar for them. And obviously, Hank, Hoshi, oh, yeah, oh, yeah, they're going to listen. And to my surprise, they did. We came out. The marketing department there was very open. The people were very open. And it was a fantastic collaboration. This was a small batch, something that, it has a long name because it's Romeo. So the actual name is Romeo by Romeo and Juliet Aging Room. A small batch. I mean, by the time you
No,
finish,
it's a massive name.
yeah, it's pretty good. We are good with the names, and we're also very good at covering a lot of the wrappers and things like that. We use a lot of papers in some of those. So that was the first one, and something that actually I think was the beginning of my relationship with Altadis and Tabacalera USA, which is tonight. So yeah, so thank you for choosing that. Well, I went directly to rum and coke. It is hot here. I mean, my terrace is about 95 degrees. So rum and coke, and having this Dominican rum Macorix, which is a Solera method, 8 years, and Mexican coke. By the way, I just had the other day. I went to get water when all this thing happened, and the only water that I could find was that one that you had, but it was a sparkling, which I didn't know. It's a green
No,
label.
they're all
And,
sparkling.
oh, they're all sparkling. Okay,
Yeah.
so they're all sparkling. So okay, so I thought it was coconut water, right? So I was not familiar with the brand. It actually a fantastic. It's a green bottle. So that's his first time by me.
That's probably the lime one. So they have
Yeah,
three
yeah.
different kinds. They have regular, which is the clear. They have lime, and then they have a grapefruit one.
Oh yeah, this and actually it's very very good. So as it just was the last few bottles that I could find. It's funny. So why the name Half Wheel? Where does the name Half Wheel come from? How do you guys
Yes.
came with that name?
So when Brooks and I were starting it, I remember where I was when we were having these conversations. We had like 2 or 3 days of about things. One of which was, what are we going to call this? Because we couldn't really start working on the design of the website or any of the business end of things until we figured out what we were going to call it. And we didn't want to call it Cigar Blog this or smoking whatever. We wanted it to be something that was related to a cigar blog, but wasn't a cigar. And I was hell-bent on having something that was a word that people in English could understand, and was easy to remember. And so we were pulling up. I mean, I remember going and looking at Ron Perlman's books and just
Right.
going through
Very good
any
encyclopedia, right?
yeah. Just trying to go through the glossary of all the terms. So you have Chivetta, Torcedor, all those things, and trying to figure out if there was anything we could take. And at some point, Steve Valle, who unfortunately didn't make it through the transition, but was working for Brooks at the time, before he fell off the face of the planet, and he said, "What about this term Medi Rueda?" Which none of us knew how to pronounce at the time because none of us could speak Spanish very well, or even to this day. And Medio Rueda literally translates to half of a wheel.
Yes.
Media being half and Rueda being wheel. And it's what they refer to bundles of 50 cigars, because they used to put them in bundles of 100, and then they started putting them in bundles of 50. And they would call the bundle of 100 a wheel because it's shaped circularly. And then the bundles of 50 were just half of a wheel, so half wheel. And that's how even today you can buy Cuban cigars and non-Cuban cigars in 50-count cabinets. It's a little bit rarer than what it used to be. And as it turned out, the name was we had to buy the name. We spent like $1,000 to buy the domain name. And then the other good thing for us was that no one had ever really used the term on Twitter or Instagram or any of that stuff. So all the social media profiles we managed to get, because the only real other way that it's been used is apparently there's some sort of obscure yoga position called half wheel. But we got the name, and I think ever since then, just about every week, somebody will ask me about why we called it half wheel. And we tell them that explanation, and the logo was pretty simple to think of.
No, it makes sense, and I never put 2 and 2 together, but you're right. So for our viewers and listeners, the wheel that he's talking about is when people roll the cigar, the factory, the rollers are putting the cigar, we put it on the wheels. And again, the half wheels at 50, the full wheels at 100. But I never put those two together. So very, very interesting. So it has continued to evolve through the years. Now you do reviews. So although your slogan is mostly for the cigar industry block, right? The industry block, but also for the consumers, huh?
Yeah, so half of I would say, so we launched in 2012 in January, and then in the middle of 2013, I would say we went through a pretty big transition. And one of the things that we did during that transition, it wasn't anything that was planned. It happened very organically, but I realized that we we weren't gonna be we were the best cigar blog I think at the time, but there was limits to that, and I was trying to find an area where we could use our expertise. I always told people at the time that I'd love to be like Cigar Aficionado, where we get to review an Audi and a Mercedes and a watch, and I'd love to be what Eric's done with Cigar Snob, where we can go take pictures of pretty girls, but ultimately, like what we were like, they had done that, and Cigar Snob does what they do, and we needed to figure out what we were good at. And what we were good at was reporting information quickly. And so we made a decision to shift the model a bit so that we would focus on the people in the industry. We try to be a sort of an online trade publication where people like you and the people that work for you, and the retailers, they would go and read our site on a daily basis. And we figured if they read the site on a daily basis, then they would tell, whenever a consumer asks, like, I really want to learn more, we always hoped that we would be the recommendation. Oh, you want to learn really what's happening in the cigar industry? Well, here's the place that all the people at the office go to on a daily basis. And what came along with that was that we decided to cover legislation in a manner that had never been covered before on the tobacco side. So we decided to write about smoking bans in parks, no matter how big the city was or how small it was, tax increases, and then obviously the FDA stuff was starting to really get serious by that point. And so we made a commitment to that. There were certainly some people that weren't particularly thrilled to see a whole bunch of smoking ban stories. And even today, sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming, but we felt like it was important to let people know what was happening, to their right to smoke and to buy tobacco and those sorts of things around the country. And obviously, between FDA and Tobacco 21, it ended up providing, and it still does, a massive amount of content for us. And there really isn't anywhere else that you can go, to my knowledge, anywhere in the world and read about tobacco legislation in the United States all in one place, like we do.
Right. You also cover the festivals, right? So we cross paths always on the festivals. You do the Pro Cigars. I think lately you have been doing the Cuban one, the Nicaragua. For example, the latest one on Nicaragua, we're together, and during the day, guys, if you've never been on these festivals, I think it's very good. Either a Pro Cigar in Dominican, which is a fantastic one, and also the one in Nicaragua, Sabor. And it's a way that all the manufacturers get together and discuss the cigars. There are visits to the cigar factories, the farms, and in the evening there's a lot of partying, dinners sponsored by the manufacturers. So we, in our side, I see you visiting the places and things, and then I go to the parties and to the dinners, and we hang out with the people. We have fun. It's a lifestyle. But then I wake up in the morning and I see something that you guys wrote. This was a number 2 day or this. Where do you make the time? Do you sleep at all these things? How do you do it?
It's a lot of work. I'd like to sleep a lot more at them, but it's interesting. We've been covering the festivals for a long time, but we used to go to the festivals, take some pictures, come back and write up a story, and sometimes it'd show up 2 months late. And eventually I realized, like, that's not what people want to see, our readers. And also, everyone's got a phone, so it doesn't do us any good to wait a week or a month when you're at the factory, taking a video and putting it up on Facebook that night. Because then when we get around to, like, yeah, our pictures might be better than your video, but, like, that was a month. And the way the festivals work is the Nicaraguan ones in January, and then the Dominican and the Cuban ones are right after one another. And so, it's one of those things where it's very painful to cover it. It's really tough to cover it by yourself. Fortunately, in Nicaragua, Patrick was there, so that meant that I only had to do half of it. Actually, probably less than half of it. But it's a lot of work. And then we have people, Brooks is either back in the States to edit photographs, And then when Brooks goes to Cuba, we have another photo editor that works so that way he doesn't have to edit his own photographs. And it's a very team effort to try to get that content up as quickly as possible and still have it be, thorough where it's not like we're just writing 100 words and going to bed.
Right. So part of what you do is also the review, and then at the end of the year, you put the top cigars of that year. Walk me through the review because, okay, so following your work, you seem to have like a dark humor sometimes, and we have actually my partner Hank Bishop has said a very dark humor and the way he describes stuff, right? How you started with the review one, and also how you managed to put all this information and the impact later on that may have, because obviously as manufacturers, as cigar people that like me, we always think, right, that we did the fantastic best cigar ever, and this and this and that, and then sometimes when we hear some of those things, how what's the impact that? So it's a long question. First, how you got into the review, how you do the review process, and then the impact that it has, and where sometimes do you find yourself with these reviews and some of the not pushback, but the how people react sometimes to that.
Yeah, so I started doing reviews because when I started, if you were going to have a cigar blog, you had to do reviews. That was what everyone did. And they evolved over time. But one of the things that I was a big proponent of was, if I'm going to go out and try to buy a refrigerator, I'm going to go to a website or a magazine and I'm going to look and see, somebody that tested 5 refrigerators. But I always want to, I'll never buy a refrigerator from someone who doesn't have in their list of here are the 5 refrigerators and one of them had some negative things about it. Because ultimately, there's no way they picked 5 perfect refrigerators. But too oftentimes when you go to not just cigar websites, but anything, it's just this one's great, this one's great, this one's good. And it's like, that's not helpful for me as a consumer. Obviously, a refrigerator is slightly larger investment than a cigar. But I always believed that it was important to, when something is good, you should let people know. And when something is bad, you should let people know. And when you let people know when something is bad, it makes the good one be all that much better and more important. And so Half Wheel carries on that tradition. We're one of the very few places where you can see a review that's under, 87, 88 points. Our average score is under 88 points. It slowly creeps up into the low 87s at this point at the end of the year. So it's a different thing. In terms of the process for the reviews, I would say we're different than I think anyone else that I know of. We don't do panels like most of the magazines do. Rather, we pick one of our reviewers to review a particular cigar. So if we were going to review the Romeo Reserva Real that you have, the Nicaragua Reserva Real in your hand, one of us would get it, and we would smoke 3 of that same cigar. So that would mean if I was going to do it, I'd smoke one today, I'd smoke one tomorrow, and I'd smoke one on Thursday. And not always necessarily in consecutive days, but generally speaking, that's how I operate. We have a score sheet that it's an Excel document where we look at flavor divided up by thirds. We look at construction, so whether that's the draw, the burn, smoke production, divided up by thirds. And then there's a category for balance. And then there's basically a key that once everything's done, we can plug the numbers into the key. And so in the case of Patrick and Brooks, they don't actually have access to the key. I'm the keeper of it. And so they'll turn in a review and they have no idea what it's scored. And I wish we had somebody else that could be in charge of the key beyond me. I don't ever really use it until I'm done with the review because it makes a big difference. But it's also meant that I don't think about cigars anymore about like, is this a 90 or 91 or whatever, because I just see this Excel document and I just punch in, did it taste good in the first third? Yes. Did it do this? And et cetera. And so that's how our reviewing works. We have a couple other things. One thing I remember, Gordon Mott, way back when he was still working for Cigar Aficionado, he did this video. I think they took it down, unfortunately. Cigar Aficionado used to have great video content. They still have some up, but like on their website before the YouTube. And some of it's gotten taken down over the years. But they had this video, and Gordon was talking about how they review cigars. And one thing I took from that was he said that he always reviews cigars in the same place at the same time of the day. And he has his own whole routine. I think he got like a tea or something, and he would sit in his office and smoke the cigars. And that was always important to me. And so I tend to smoke my cigars. Now it's gotten a little bit earlier. Now it's usually after lunch, but before dinner. But it used to always be well after dinner. I'd sit outside on my patio, by myself. I still do it by myself, no distractions, and just try to focus on the cigar as much as I can. As far as the pushback goes, it is what it is. At this point, I think everyone's kind of understood Half Wheel's going to do whatever Half Wheel's going to do.
Right. We still get hurt, but
yeah.
So at the beginning when this started happening, the reaction had changed then now because they know you and the relationship. But was it always like that?
No, it wasn't like that. I mean, when it first started, it was a lot easier because no one was reading it. So, that not Half Wheel, but at least in the cigar feed and Smoking Stogie, people just didn't know about it. So it was a bit easier. As people got to know about it, then you get some of the phone calls, and we still get some pushback here and there. But I mean, I certainly know we could have more friends if we approach things differently. But we're not really in this for friends. And like I said, we always, when we started this, I said, I want to create the cigar blog that I want to read. And we took that motto on. So we want to create the cigar blog that we want to read. And the cigar blog that I want to read is probably one that's a bit more brutal than Half Wheel is, to be quite honest. But it's one.
Oh my God.
But not necessarily in terms of the words, but in terms of the numbers, because the numbers, it's so tough to figure out. Like every cigar, even at Half Wheel, it's really hard for a cigar to score below 80 points at this point. Unless the cigar was rolled improperly, it's really tough. Because if it burns, it means you're going to get flavor. And unless the tobacco was just absolute crap, it's going to get a certain amount of points. And it makes it, like, for a cigar to get a 40 at Half Wheel at this point would be, without construction issues, it would be impossible.
Right.
But regardless, I want to read a cigar blog where, not everything is the greatest cigar in the world. Because when you smoke cigars, you don't think that everything's the greatest cigar in the world. And when the buyers at JR Cigar smoke cigars, they certainly don't think that every single new product that some manufacturer's trying to sell them is particularly great.
Right.
The only other thing I would say is we don't factor in price into scores. I don't really know how many other people do that, but that changes things. There are cigars that aren't the best cigars in the world, but are very good cigars for $8 or $6. And then there are cigars that are very good, but aren't worth $40. And we treat a $40 cigar the same way we treat a $5 cigar.
Right, and it's hard because sometimes you're right, price. So sometimes when we talk in individually, say this is a fantastic $3 cigar, and it wouldn't be a fantastic $40 cigar, and things like that. So if there's anything else that you would like to see in the review process, that one say, hey, maybe I can do this or that, or pretty much has continued the same, and you envision continue the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the reviewing of cigars is, at least as far as Half Wheel is concerned, I think is kind of what it is at this point. I would love for us to be able to do it where, we had a panel, so it wasn't just one person's opinion, because the people that smoke, when we do the top 25, that's all four of us will grade each cigar. Any cigar that's eligible, which basically means it's new and it gets a 91 or above, and then we'll buy some more cigars and send them out, and everyone will smoke them individually. It's always interesting to see people's opinions, about the cigars as that comes in. But in terms of, adding any new features, I don't think so. One of the other big things that's probably the most important part, similar to that Gordon Mott video, is no matter who you get your cigar ratings from or who cigar ratings you read or watch or whatever, the one thing you always want to make sure is that they're consistent. You want to make sure that they're going to treat this cigar the same as they treated the cigar they reviewed last week. And so for us, anytime that we make changes to how we do reviews, even if they're small, it's a massive process, and one that we almost always will wait until the end of the year, until the new year starts, to make those changes. We haven't really made any. The last change of the score sheet, I think, was 4 or 5 years ago. And it's a painful process because it all the cigars you reviewed up until the change are under one system, and everything after the change is on a different system. And so we really tried to, the last time we did it, to try to make something that would last the website. And hopefully we don't ever have to change how we score cigars.
Right. So have you ever, Charlie, have they ever had a situation that you had a review that it wasn't perhaps the best review, or it was what it was, but then a few years later or even months later or something like that, you had that cigar in a different way, just enjoying the cigar, and you say, wow, this is different and impress you. Have you had that occasion, and then have you gone back to say, well, should we take a second look at this? or once you do the review, you really don't review it again?
No, so every Monday, although yesterday for reasons that we won't get into, it didn't happen. It'll happen on Friday. But every Monday we do what's called a Redux review. So the way it works is the cigar has to be at least 6 months from when we last reviewed it. And then we will have that reviewer go back and just smoke one cigar using the same scoring system and everything and just see. So that was supposed to run yesterday was the Avo Improvisation 30 Years. That was a cigar that Patrick reviewed in April of 2018. And he smoked one, I guess, probably late March. So it'll run on Fridays. That's almost 2 years since that cigar came out. And we do that, generally speaking, every Monday, except when things like yesterday happened. And those are always interesting. You know, I'll never forget Pete Johnson used to have, he still does, I suppose, but he used to tell people all the time, people would ask him like, oh, what do you think about Cubans? And, I hear we need to age them. And Pete would always say, look, bad tobacco is bad tobacco. So if you take bad tobacco and you age it for 2 years, it's not going to get any better. And similarly, if it was rolled poorly, it's not going to matter how long you leave it in the humidor. It's still going to be plugged or it's still going to be underfilled. It's not like that's going to magically solve itself. But there certainly are changes that happen to the actual tobacco. It's a living, and it's dead at this point, but it's still fermenting. Fermenting is probably not the best word. Yeah, it's like wine. It's always going to change. And some of those changes you can try to control, like with the temperature and the humidity, very similar to wine. And some of those things are kind of mysterious. And even if you have a box of cigars, they may not all age the same, even if it's in the box. But there have been times in which, it's rare for a cigar to score, I would say, 8 or 9 points higher than it did originally. But there are times in which cigars have scored substantially higher. And there are times in which they've scored substantially lower. I mean, Brooks and I were having a conversation earlier today about how really we found some super old Ashton VSGs, some round Ashton VSGs, which meant that they're one of the first 2 or 3 years that VSG was out. And I think VSG might be the best blend that Fuentes ever made. Those cigars, I remember smoking one, in 2010, 2011, 2012, the originals, they were smoking great. And we bought some and I smoked some a couple years ago and they had just lost itself. And that's a cigar that, was extremely good when it came out, I would have to imagine. And I was not around smoking at that point, but, has aged and then it hit a wall. And maybe 10 years from now, maybe it'll be a much different cigar and it'll be better. But at least at the moment, doesn't seem to be going that way. And I think that's important to understand is that unlike wine, cigars will go through periods where they get better and then they'll get worse and then they might get better. They're not always going to be the same thing. It's interesting to watch, particularly coming out of the era that you and I have been, in the business together, where cigars got stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. Cigars don't seem to age particularly well. And we don't have a great understanding of why. I think some of it is scientific with the oils and things like that, where the tobacco has been processed to be strong. And then, unfortunately, that means that it's not going to age as well as some milder cigars will. I think some of that also is, when you're blending a cigar to be strong, you're blending it to be strong, right now or 90 days from now. You're not blending it to be something beautiful 5 years from now. Right. And you don't have that capability unless you blend the cigar and then wait 5 years before you release it to figure out what's going to happen. And so that's always been an interesting thing. There was a cigar like that, the Oliva Special S. On the boxes, they said, like, I forget the exact term, but they marketed it as, these are going to be great in 5 years. They were not great in 5 years. Like, they said, like, buy these like wine. Buy these, put these down for 5 years, and they're just going to be beautiful. And they didn't end up tasting any better 5 years later. They also, unfortunately, came out 6 months before Series V, and they were more expensive than Series V. And then once Series V came out, Oliva didn't need Special S anymore.
Absolutely. So as we come into the close, but I two quick questions. One is, have you mentioned the going to the stronger cigars, and there's definitely has been a move. You're right, since we started to where we are today. Overall, do you see in the market today better cigars than, let's say, 10, 20 years ago when you started, or not as good? Although they get stronger or less stronger things, but overall, you have better cigars in the market according to you, or not as good as before?
I think the overall quality of cigars is better than where it was. I certainly was not around 20 years ago smoking cigars.
Well,
So,
yes,
but
I
yeah, but
was.
yeah, but 10 years ago, I would say the cigars have gotten better for the most part. Certainly the floor, the worst cigar now is better, much better than it was 10 years ago.
Right.
The one thing I would say is that, and Half Wheel certainly has helped to cause this problem, is that it used to be a lot different, and you know this much better than I do. It used to be you had to make one new product a year, maybe, and you would get to spend all year essentially working on that one product, or you would have 3 different projects in the works, and you would just keep going and making cigars, letting them rest for 30 days, smoking the samples, going back, making a tweak, letting it rest for 30 days, smoking the samples until you were happy with it. Now, even in the post-FDA world, cigar manufacturers, I mean, you guys are coming out with a new product every 3 weeks, it seems like. And there's just no way that you can...
No, not every 3, but every 3.5 weeks.
Yeah. So there's no way that you can put that much time today as you did 10 or 15 years ago into those products, because you're having to make the market has... Maybe you don't have to. Padron seems to be doing just fine, but the market has suggested that they want a lot more cigars, new cigars, and so I don't know if the best cigars today are as good as they were 10 years ago, the top 2 or 3%. But I also know that every year when I look at our top 25, I'll be like, like these are good cigars. Some of them are very good cigars, but like last year was better, and that happens every year. And so I'm led to believe that a lot of it's just nostalgia. It's always
Maybe.
that the grass is always greener type of scenario. But I am convinced that the floor, if you walk into a cigar and just, close your eyes and just walk somewhere randomly and pick up a cigar, it's probably better than it was 10 years ago, though it's also probably twice as expensive than it was 10 years ago.
Well,
So
it is. And we have to say thanks to many different factors, but one is definitely the availability of tobacco. But I do believe, in my opinion, that we are doing, in our end, a better job right now of treating the tobacco and looking for better alternative for tobacco preparation, of the tobacco fermentation and aging. I do see that compared to when I started. So the last thing is, in my case, is you're right. We come up with a lot of different blends. So I spend a lot of my time trying new blends, working on the new blends. I have not lost the love for the cigars. I still separate myself when I'm working and when I'm enjoying the cigar, right? Are you able to do that? Can you smoke a cigar and really not think about the numbers in your head of construction, this and that? Or it gets to the point that you enjoy a cigar just for what it is, the moment, the cigar. How are you able to put all these 2 things together?
yeah. So I'm like right now, I'm not paying attention to the cigar I'm smoking and trying to think like, where would I rate this? That only happens when I'm sitting down with the spreadsheet open on my computer and ready to rate a cigar, because it's a different process. You have to sort of trick yourself into forgetting about anything else, at least in my case. But it is a bit different in the sense that every time I smoke a cigar, I'm at least thinking, was this better than the last one I smoked? Was this better than the last product that Aging Room put out? There is that, like, it has this aged well. It's a lot different than going to a restaurant. I never sit down at a restaurant and, they serve the appetizer and I'm like, you know what? Like, if the last one was an 8, this is a 9. Like, that never happens. At the end of the meal, I might be like, oh, this was a much better experience than I had the last time. But I'm not sitting there evaluating, how's the texture on my entree, like a food critic might be doing. And so it's a little bit of both, but, it's certainly, I will say this, that there, they always say, if you never want to work a day in your life, just do something you love. There is truth to that. There's also the flip side, which is that if you take something that you love and you make it your work, chances are it gets a little bit less enjoyable, because it's hard to separate, the work end of it from the love end of it. But there's no question. I mean, there's still cigars that I get excited about. Certainly a lot fewer than when I didn't understand the other side of the curtain. But at the end of the day, if you're going to smoke a cigar, or if you're going to pour a glass of wine, or whatever your passion might be, whatever your interest is, you know, it's still going to be the same thing. It's going to give you the same thing. It's
Right.
it's your choice as to whether or not you are willing to be in that mindset and environment to enjoy it to the same capability. I certainly, you know, when you're by yourself, it's a little bit easier. I'm sure it's like if you go hang out with a whole bunch of people that don't work in the cigar industry and you show up for cigar night, they want free cigars. They want to talk to you about all this random stuff. They want to tell you about their cousin who left Cuba, who used to be the factory manager, wherever the hell, there's some parts of it that are hard to escape when you're with other people, but I can still find time to enjoy a cigar by
Been
myself.
been there, done that, guys. I would like to say we have this cigar break. The idea was to have a shorter conversation, but it's hard when you are talking to someone like Charlie Minato, half wheel that has a tremendous history, very interested. I've been very important for the industry. Guys, you can follow us not only over here on the Cigar Live in Facebook and also in Instagram, and also across our different channels in Instagram at Montecristo_USA, Romeo and Julieta, Romeo y Julieta _USA, Aging Room Cigars, and A Shortman _USA. Charlie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Stay safe in these difficult moments. I get to see you in all these festivals, in all these things, and I appreciate you taking the time and come and talk to us and tell our viewers a little bit about halfwheel.com. You can find all of the information about cigars, your favorite cigars, the rating, write-ups, and all of that. One last comment to our viewers.
No, I certainly appreciate the opportunity, Rafael, and I know that it's a trying time for everyone right now. But I will say that whenever we get back to whatever the new normal is, I think I speak for the entire cigar industry, including the people that work at JR Cigar, which is we definitely are going to need you to go back to your cigar shops, your local cigar shops, because ultimately, even for people like JR and Cigars International and the catalogs, the lifeblood of the cigar industry is still at this moment in the brick and mortar cigar shops, and they are much like restaurants and bars. They're hurting right now. For Rafael and I to be able to do what we do, and the people that work with us to be able to do what we do, we really need the cigar shops in America and around the world to be as strong as possible. And hopefully you'll see one of us in one of them whenever we get through this.
Absolutely, guys. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Stay safe. Charlie Minato, thank you for joining us from halfwheel.com, and I appreciate it. Greg, take us back home. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. See you soon. Bye-bye. Cheers, Charlie.